Brain lateralization describes how the brain is divided into the left and right hemisphere. Each hemisphere of the brain carries out a different function, such as the right side is responsible for overseeing sensitive processes like feelings, intuition, and sensory matters, and the left hemisphere is responsible for more analytical, logical, and verbal thought processes. The two lateralized sides come together for the brain to function as a whole system, even though the two sides carry different functions separately. Memory is a process of maintaining information over time. Memory is the means by which that we draw on our past experiences in order to use that information in the present. Memory is a really crucial part of how our brain operates because it allows us to draw back on experiences, thoughts, and feelings from the past and carries them over into how we process the present and future. Without memory, we cannot process knowledge or information regarding the future or present. With this comes the HERA model, or the Hemispheric Encoding and Retrieval Asymmetry Model, which is a process-specific description of experimental data provided by a large set of functional neuroimaging studies. According to HERA, left prefrontal cortex is more involved than the right prefrontal cortex in episodic memory encoding, whereas the right prefrontal cortex is more involved than the left prefrontal cortex in episodic memory retrieval. Lastly, lateralization of memory refers to how a person's memory can be affected or stored in different hemispheres or lobes of the brain and their significant effects. In our project, we want to dive in even deeper on this concept and prove through experiments and studies how brain lateralization can have its effects on a person's memory and how they can encode, store, and retrieve that memory in different lobes of the brain, and specifically how they impact memory.
Research suggests that the right hemisphere of the brain is visual and intuitive. It is responsible for emotions, arts, imagination, and more. While it is known for its dominance and creativity, it is also responsible for critical cognitive functions, such as attention and processing. The role of processing in the right hemisphere impacts its significance in memory. Experiments like those of Gazzaniga suggest that the right hemisphere retains more information that is vertical, like physical features, in comparison to the left hemisphere. This led to less confusions apparent in the right hemisphere of patients that underwent a complete corpus callosum resection. So the right hemisphere in this study was better able to recall and recognize events that were already presented and reject novel stimuli. Further research also supports that the right hemisphere is important in nonverbal memory, as deficits are less observed in the resection of the right temporal lobe. Scientists have been exploring the specific role of memory in the right hemisphere of the brain for decades. Experiments have gone as far as measuring event-related potentials to examine electrophysiological differences in the processing of memory and the asymmetry in the right hemisphere.
The right hemisphere seems to be involved in the active retrieval of specifically long-term memories. An EEG study done by Evans and Federmeyer in 2007 provides evidence for this idea. Participants in their experiment were randomly presented with words to their left and right visual fields, during which they gave no response. Later, the same words and some novel words were centrally presented, and participants had to respond whether or not the word had been shown at any point during the experiment. The pauses between presentations of words varied into short, medium, and long lag trials. EEG activity was recorded, and ERP effects like the old-new effect, the P2 repetition effect, and the DM effect were noted. They found that there were stronger memory signals for words that were presented to the right hemisphere, especially during the long lag trials. Specifically, they observed an old-new effect, which is linked to the explicit memory retrieval, for words presented to the right hemisphere, but they did not observe this effect in the left. They also found a P2 repetition effect linked to perceptual matching processes for words that were presented to the right hemisphere. Finally, they found a DM effect, predictive of later recognition performance in the right prefrontal, central, parietal, and occipital regions. These findings provide evidence that the right hemisphere seems to play a role in higher-order semantic processing, which makes various information available for later decision-making processes, and therefore, the right hemisphere is engaged in the retention of verbal information for later retrieval.
The left hemisphere is known for specializing in language, whether through gesture or speaking. Specifically, the left prefrontal and medial temporal lobe regions have been found to play a role in verbal memory and memory encoding. Lesion studies to the MTL and prefrontal cortex showed that the left prefrontal cortex is important for verbal memory, or remembering words. Furthermore, imaging studies show that the left prefrontal cortex is important for memory encoding. Tolving and colleagues proposed the HERA model, short for hemispheric encoding retrieval asymmetry. It states that lateralization of memory processing only depends on encoding or retrieval distinction, not on whether the material is verbal or nonverbal. Kelly et al. Used fMRI and brain activation in response to different stimuli, arguing that lateralization depends on stimuli. In this study, the left posterior prefrontal cortex was found to be active when encoding words. Finally, Dolan and Fletcher found specialization of function in the left prefrontal cortex and left medial temporal lobe regions. These functions include integrating new stimuli with new knowledge and processing new stimuli, respectively.
The left hemisphere has been widely accepted as being involved in the processes of verbal memory and memory encoding. This idea proposed by the HERA model has been extensively tested by various researchers. The model, in short, holds that the left prefrontal cortex is directly involved in the retrieval and processing of semantic memory and the encoding of novel stimuli into episodic memory. Michael S. Gazzaniga, Alan Kingstone, and Michael B. Miller performed various encoding tasks on famous split-brain patients JW and VP to determine the left hemisphere's role in the encoding of words. To test the encoding of word stimuli, the patients were shown 16 nouns in the left visual field and 16 to the right visual field. To test encoding, 24 words were presented, each set with 16 old words and 8 novel words. During encoding, patients then engaged in both a shallow perceptual task and a deep semantic task. The shallow perceptual task consisted of patients answering the question, does the word contain the letter A? The deep semantic task required that patients answer the question, does the word represent a living object? Recognition performance in the left hemisphere improved significantly from the shallow condition to the deep condition, while showing no improvement in the right hemisphere. The results further support the HERA model that the left hemisphere's performance in episodic encoding is much greater than that of the right hemisphere.
Brain lateralization of memory has a deep effect on how memories are encoded, stored, and retrieved. The right hemisphere is important in nonverbal memory and explicit memory retrieval. The studies discussed show the right hemisphere's specific memory retrieval performance was significantly better than the left hemisphere's performance, thus indicating the right hemisphere's involvement in higher order semantic processing. The left hemisphere is important in verbal memory encoding and episodic memory. The studies discussed show the left hemisphere's performance in semantic memory retrieval and encoding stimuli into episodic memory was much more superior than the right hemisphere's. The different studies discussed all support the HERA model, which says different types of memories are encoded and retrieved based on brain lateralization.